Happy Halloween, if you celebrate it. Blessed Samhain, if you celebrate it. Happy Eve of All Saints, if you celebrate it. And have a really good October 31st if to you the universe is a cold, dead machine. All are welcome to Vayse, a podcast about weird stuff. I'm Peter C. Hine.
And I'm not. I'm Stephen James Buckley. Sorry.
That's right. And tonight we're going to do something different, hopefully a little more lighthearted for Halloween. We're going to talk about a defining moment in popular culture, a landmark in comedy, horror, and science fiction, a touchstone for both me and Buckley, and probably one of the reasons that we're both here tonight talking about weird stuff. We're going to talk about Ghostbusters.
Yeah, so Ghostbusters. And what Hine says is completely true. I think that was the first thing I remember talking to you about was Ghostbusters. I think it was like our first, sort of the first thing we bonded over, and it's kind of been with us sort of throughout our lives. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing film. It still stands up today. And I think, you know, it's one of those, it got to us just at the right time and the right age, when, you know, you didn't just have Ghostbusters, you had like the real Ghostbusters cartoons and you had the action figures and stuff. And I remember seeing Ghostbusters 2 at the cinema. So, you know, we were just exactly the right age and the right kind of children to, you know, that it got right into and fired up our imaginations.
My parents wouldn't take me to see Ghostbusters 2. I think I was so into ghosts and the occult at that age. I think, what were we, like 9 years old, 7 years old, maybe 7 years old. I think that they thought it would just encourage me. So that worked.
Yeah, I was going to say it didn't work out very well, did it?
I think that Ghostbusters is, at least the first one, is maybe one of those films that is as close to a universal experience in the sort of Western world as you can have in film. You know, I mean, there's a few like that. There's Raiders of the Lost Ark's a bit like that.
Yeah.
Maybe one or two other films.
Star
maybe kind
Wars.
of Lord of the Rings has come into that. Star Wars, yeah. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, I think have sort of come into that thing where you very rarely meet someone who hasn't seen Ghostbusters. And I don't think that you will come across someone, probably, even now, whatever it is, nearly 40 years later, who wouldn't recognize the Ghostbusters symbol if they saw it.
And would you want to meet someone who hadn't seen Ghostbusters?
Well, I once did.
Yeah.
I won't name him. It was someone that you and I both know I lived with.
Is he still alive?
He knows who he is, but basically I sat him down, got him an ice cream, and we watched Ghostbusters.
I think I know who it might be. I think I know. Yeah. I've got an idea of who this might be.
He knows. If he's listening to this, he knows who it is. He remembers that day well.
Yeah.
As everyone, I mean, I remember. Probably one of my first experiences that I remember of watching a film was Ghostbusters. I think I remember like hiding behind the my grandparents' sofa. Like I had it recorded on a VHS from a Christmas Day showing.
Right. Okay.
Which is that one that was edited.
Oh yeah, I remember we watched it together. A group of us when we were about 15, 16 watched it together, and Hine was horrified because his version of it that he had taped off the telly had all the swearing cut out, and it had Ray's erotic dream cut out as well. And
loads of it was cut. It was a Christmas Day showing. I think the first time it had ever been shown on British network television. And my granddad had taped it off TV, and I remember him showing it me, that library ghost scene.
Terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. I remember like literally running behind the sofa. But that was it. Like, I think more than any other film I've seen Ghostbusters, more than any other film. I've watched it over and over and over again, and there's no film that could compare to that for me. When I used to go running at the gym, for like an hour on a treadmill, I'd have nothing to listen to before the days of like iPods and stuff. I would just go through the script to Ghostbusters in my brain and just watch it in my mind as I was running, because I just seen it so many times. It was one thing that I could reliably
Yeah.
watch, and it's not a long film either. I mean, it's a decent length compared to the blockbusters that are around now.
Yeah.
I think it's about 1 hour 45.
Yeah, if that. It's pretty short.
Yeah, it's very, very short, but it was incredibly successful as well. I mean, I think it was the biggest film of 1984, apart from Beverly Hills Cop or something like that, and it was for ages the highest grossing comedy that had ever been. It was just like a runaway success. The guys who were in it were kind of famous already. They were from Saturday Night Live and various comedy troupes from America, but after that they were sort of stratospheric stars. And it's weird when you see now, like, you don't get many film stars like those guys anymore, do you?
No, definitely
because they're not
not.
kind of conventionally beautiful. I mean, they're photogenic without a doubt, but they're not beautiful.
The thing with Ghostbusters is, like, and I guess it's true of a lot of films back then, they were just like regular middle-aged men. Like, they were probably in the late 30s, early 40s, like receding hairlines, that they weren't like, whereas if the film was made now from scratch, if someone came up with the idea now in a universe where the actual Ghostbusters never existed and someone came up with the idea, they would all be like these kind of beautifully sculpted, like, gym bodies, and sort of it wouldn't be the same. But these guys were just like regular Joes, weren't they?
Yeah, it's hard to think of any comparable actors now. I think Seth Rogen, perhaps, and there's maybe one or two comedy actors who maybe occupy a similar-ish area now, but there aren't many. I don't know if there were at the time back then either, or whether it was just that this film brought them together and that's part of its appeal.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things which made it so successful was the kind of almost the branding. You had like the logo and the song, and they were two. I mean, the song is I reckon as many people know the song as have actually seen the film. Like, they know it, as a recognizable piece of music. When that comes on, people know exactly, just like the Indiana Jones music or the Star Wars music, people instantly know what that means, almost to a point where, it's used as in parody in other films or TV programs where the Ghostbusters music comes on, denoting that there's something Ghostbusty going on.
Yeah,
everyone knows what that means. And there's the same with like the parodies of the logo. When you get like a pest control place that will have like a rat inside the sign or whatever, similar.
Yeah, and I think that it's difficult to imagine it now, 40 years on or whatever we are, how original the idea was as well. Because obviously there'd been the ideas of, spirits and hauntings and ridding places of them, like in The Exorcist and countless other horror movies that had been. But these were basically, like you say, kind of exterminator type people with nuclear technology who were using basically what was a science fiction premise to trap and contain ghosts, which now we kind of take for granted, a bit like how we take for granted, that a time machine could be made into a DeLorean or whatever, but I mean, I think that Ghostbusters was just an incredibly original idea. There was nothing really like that before Ghostbusters, and there hasn't been much since that sort of had that sort of level of, I think sort of the way it fused comedy, science fiction, horror, romance, as well as having the improvisational edge, which the Saturday Night Live guys brought to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very bold in that respect, wasn't it? In terms of like the subject matter as well, like it went to some pretty dark places that, that you'd normally get in a horror film, but in a massive blockbuster comedy.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the appeal. I think there's something in it for everyone, isn't there? I don't know whether now to talk about sort of the exclusion of Winston from the main sort of three core.
I mean, yeah, he was added, wasn't he? Later in the first film, certainly he was just a sort of a workman, wasn't he? He was just kind of
They had him as a much bigger scripted character when he was going to be played by. I think they'd originally written him for Eddie Murphy, and they had the idea that he'd be a wisecracking comedian like the rest of them. And then I think Ernie Hudson auditioned, and then when they got the script to him just before shooting, they'd basically abbreviated his part and given all the good lines to Venkman. Which Bill Murray probably didn't say those lines anyway. He probably said something completely different than off script to start with.
I mean, the thing is, though, with the exclusion of Winston, I think it is important in a group that there are kind of almost people who are less forthright and less in the spotlight. He was an important part of the group in terms of he kind of brought like a grounding to it, an everyman sort of grounding that some of the others with their highfalutin academic ideas maybe didn't have.
Yeah, and it gives you perhaps a lens through which to see the Ghostbusters from like an everyman perspective.
Yeah.
Someone who comes to it new. I mean, he doesn't come into the film till over halfway through.
No.
That's when he goes for the job interview.
When they start getting a bit more, when they need a bit of help.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I think which really makes the Winston Zeddemore character is Ernie Hudson's incredible performance.
Yeah,
because the heart that he gives lines like, which could have been throwaway lines like "I love this town" or the bit about "I'm only doing this for the money" and that kind of thing. He gives it such heart and character that he really, really, really sells it in a way that I don't think a lot of actors could have done. It's just a really, really good performance. And I watched the film last week when I was researching for this episode, and that was one of the things that really struck me was how much the film changes when Winston comes into it and when Ernie Hudson's character, obviously with everything he brings to that character, not just the sort of physicality, but also, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than just the heart that he brings to the movie, which is really, really good. And even in the second film, like, where does he go to during the courtroom scene?
Yeah, he's not. It's almost like he's just I mean, it was probably something as simple as he wasn't available on the day they were filming. But
I read about it, and Ernie Hudson says he doesn't know why he wasn't there. Like he just disappears for that bit, which is very weird because they keep that core group, and a lot of the posters exclude Winston's character as well, don't they?
For Ghostbusters 2 or Ghostbusters?
Ghostbusters 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
But he's also the only character or the only actor in there which has a bona fide connection to Twin Peaks as well.
Because he was in The Return.
Exactly, yeah. So he's a magical character for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
But a lot of his lines, like we were saying, went to Venkman, and Venkman is probably the standout character of the whole thing, isn't he? He's the one that I think that the studios were banking on, Bill Murray's performance as Venkman to carry the movie a bit. Yeah,
I mean, he's a bit more. I think he's almost a bit more relatable, or at least he's like Ray and Egon are both like incredibly nerdy. Like you've got like a spectrum of like nerdiness and
yeah.
Egon Spengler's on one side, and then Ray's a bit more down to earth. He's not quite as weird as Egon. Then you've got Venkman, who's like incredibly charming, but still has a bit of a background in science and stuff. And then you've got Winston, who's just like a guy.
Yeah, he's just a man.
He's just a normal man, an innocent man.
Yeah.
I watched a few bits of the real Ghostbusters actually, just to sort of remind myself, because I did watch that a lot. That was a big thing for me. It's funny what they've done to the characters, because they've made Egon's like this kind of, they've kind of made him look really handsome and like with that kind of weird like sort of bouffant hair and like them sort of really full lips, and they're all like
square jaw.
Yeah, they're all like really ripped apart from Ray, who's like really fat. But then apparently they got Ray. There's an episode where Ray like has to go to the gym, and they actually slimmed down the character. So I don't know why they did that. And then Venkman's a lot more he's like a more exaggerated version of the film. Venkman, he's really, really sleazy and like You know?
Yeah, I mean that's the problematic thing I think with the Venkman character, isn't it? Because whilst he ends up having like a lot of heart as well, and obviously at the end of the film, you know, he's prepared to sacrifice himself to try to get Dana back and that kind of thing. A lot of what he does is very, very wrong. I think
it's not aged well, has it?
No, I don't like the idea of taking films out of the context of their time and then examining them under the lens of the modern day, because it doesn't always work like that. You know, you can't always do that. But there's some things where I think that you have to say that this shouldn't probably have been. Well, let's take an example. Okay, so the first time he goes to Dana Barrett's apartment, right? He goes there under false pretenses. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. He has a load of equipment with him that he doesn't know how it works. He snoops around her apartment, you know, while she clearly wants him to go. Then he spontaneously declares his love for her, and then refuses to leave. Yeah, this is not good behavior.
Also, doesn't he have some sedatives in his bag as well, or is that's the next time he goes to the apartment?
That's later. He's got Thorazine in his bag.
He just happens to have some kind of sedative with him. Now, he's not a medical doctor. Do you know what I'm saying?
No. It's questionable whether he's any kind of doctor. He says he's a doctor of psychology and parapsychology, but the other Ghostbusters say that he never studied. Some like unofficial canon that I'd read, and I couldn't find it again when I was researching. I'd read it years and years ago. Was that basically Ray was Venkman's friend from when they were younger.
Yeah,
and Venkman met Spengler at university, and Spengler basically got him through university. It kind of makes sense. Yeah. There's clearly like it is canon that Venkman introduced Stans to Spengler,
right?
Because I think that was in part of one of the scripts that never got through, where basically Venkman's saying that he needs to get some of the credit for all the machinery because he brought Spengler and Stans together.
Okay.
But I think one of the other things that makes Venkman problematic as a character is that he's played by Bill Murray, who has for the last decade really been dogged by accusations of quite bad things, really, like
behaving
bullying,
like Peter Venkman.
A lot like that, yeah. Straddling women on set, kissing women who don't want to be kissed on set,
licking women's
bullying
arms.
Female cast members. He's the thing is that he always was. The thing is that now we're more connected with the internet and stuff. But when you start to read stories that come out, it was just taken with a bit more humor when he was a mega star, wasn't it? When he was the Murricane, you know. Apparently, the first time he ever met Sigourney Weaver, he just picked her up and threw her over his shoulder and walked down the street with her on his shoulder, which is quite a weird thing to do, isn't it? And she took it in good light, and she even speaks of it now. The thing is that I think, which is important, is that Bill Murray is quite a big guy. You don't always get that from Ghostbusters, but he's well over 6 foot.
Okay.
He's quite a big guy. The thing is that Sigourney Weaver is also 6 foot. So she is Venkman's, or Dana Barrett is Venkman's equal mentally. Well, she's superior to him mentally and physically. You know, so and physically she's basically his equal. So it doesn't seem that bad when you're watching Ghostbusters. You don't really get the feeling that she's intimidated by him at all, like you might have done.
She's not a particularly vulnerable character, is she?
No, she's not. She's very like strong woman. I mean, she's a fantastic character as well. I've got to say, the performance that Sigourney Weaver gives as Dana Barrett is absolutely incredible. That was another thing that absolutely stood out when I watched it again. Is she's so good? Like the way that she changes. It was her idea that Dana got possessed by the dogs.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah, and the way that her character changes throughout the film, and then the way that she portrays Dana when Zool is possessing her, and when she plays Dana at the beginning, I just think it's really, really like it's really great, and they do have definite chemistry, Venkman and Dana, or Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver. It's a really, really good matching on screen, but there is that sort of creepy undertone, like you say, you know, with he goes around and then he sedates her, but if he sedated her, he must have had those drugs with him when he didn't know that she was going to be possessed when he turned up at her apartment. I mean, very, very dodgy.
I think one of the many things I liked about Ghostbusters Afterlife was the fact that in the end credits scene they fully acknowledged Bill Murray not Bill Murray. They fully acknowledged Peter Venkman being problematic.
Yeah, I mean, Afterlife was a really, really good movie. I enjoyed, and I liked the way that they based it around Spengler so much.
It was fantastic. It was like you told me to watch it, and I'd not really considered watching it because I generally don't like reboots of films that I liked when I was a kid because fuck you, leave them alone. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull being a great example. But
yeah,
I watched this on your recommendation and I absolutely loved it. And I watched it with my partner who's not really familiar with the Ghostbusters, certainly nowhere near as familiar as we are with the original film. And she loved it as well, even though it worked as a standalone film without all the history. It worked well as a good sort of modern, fairly funny, but fairly sort of creepy horror film, as well as being, but the likes of us watch it and we're there picking up on all the little references to Ivo Shandor and Gozer worship and stuff. Like we notice all that stuff, but it was interesting watching it with someone who didn't notice all that stuff, but still thought it was a really good film because it was. I mean, it was. I feel like without Stranger Things, that wouldn't have existed. I feel like it was. You could tell it was. They thought, right, we influenced Stranger Things to begin with. Now Stranger Things will influence us, and because Stranger Things wouldn't have existed without Ghostbusters, but now it kind of came full circle, and I feel it had that same feeling of Stranger Things, that same feeling of where they get a really good balance of like the creepy, dark stuff, but then it's got like that, like you say, like the heart and the kind of, I guess because there was some like child characters in it, one of whom was in Stranger Things. That kind of really gave it the Stranger Things vibe, but it just had that feeling of being like a film that you watch when you're a kid.
I think that what gave it so much heart was the genius idea was the way that they didn't sweep the death of Harold Ramis under the rug.
No.
It wasn't like, oh, where's Egon sort of thing. The whole film was based around where's Egon?
Where's Egon?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, very good. Very good. And I think that was really what gave it its strength, and that's what made it so emotional as well. I mean, my partner, we saw it at the cinema and she was just crying, and I was very close to crying as well. I think if I had been crying, there would definitely have been tears of joy. Just watching that film, particularly the end scene, because it's so good. But when they brought Harold Ramis on to help rewrite the original Ghostbusters, he wasn't going to be Egon Spengler. He kind of fell in love with the character as they wrote it. So they considered Jeff Goldblum, who I can kind of see. Yeah. He's got that
Although I think he's a bit more Venkman, really.
Yeah, it depends which Goldblum you're getting.
Yeah.
Because you could imagine him being a bit more like, the Goldblum that's in Independence Day.
Yeah, but even so, he's a bit like... He's got a bit of that, like...
He's a bit smoother,
sleaziness,
isn't he?
Yeah, whereas Egon's...
Yeah. Then they considered Christopher Lloyd. I can't see that myself.
I can only see him as the Doc, really.
Yeah. And get this one. They considered Christopher Walken.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
That would have been Dark Egon, the darkest
That would have been something else, wouldn't it? Imagine that.
You don't have... Oh, my God. Imagine... I can't even... Oh, God, this is really... Can you imagine what our lives would have been like if we'd have been subject to Christopher Walken at the age of 7?
Imagine if we'd been playing with toys of Christopher Walken as 7-year-olds.
Oh, God. Whoever made that call to not have Christopher Walken, like, if you think the world's bad now, imagine what it would have been like if...
I know, but as Ramis wrote Spengler's character, he fell in love with him and he... basically they became one. He put more and more of himself into that character, but it was him who wrote it with Dan Aykroyd. And really, like, the history of where it came from is quite like interesting. I won't go into it too deeply, but basically Aykroyd came up with the idea when he was in a haunted barn at an estate that his family owned, and his great-grandfather, Dan Aykroyd's great-grandfather was Sam Aykroyd, who was a famous spiritualist researcher.
Right.
Then his granddad was one of the first people who experimented with EVP. So he's one of the first people who claimed to have caught ghost voices on the radio. And then his dad, Peter Ackroyd, wrote a book called A History of Ghosts. So the whole thing, it was like deeply ingrained. And Dan Aykroyd is definitely a believer in ghosts and spirits. And I think a lot of everything that's factual that comes from Ghostbusters, all the bits that are based on real life hauntings, all the bits of little bits of information and long explanations and that sort of thing, all come from his general love of the subject. And that's one of the things, is that it's all treated lovingly, isn't it? That the people who believe in ghosts are the good guys. The people who don't believe in ghosts are the bad guys.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, like, from like researching this episode and looking into it, it actually surprised me how much more, how much based on real stories and things it is. How much kind of background they'd obviously done research and looked into a number of different things. It wasn't just making it up as they went along.
Yeah, and when the idea was first conceived, it was something much crazier. Like they were in space and they went through dimensions, and they were employed by Ivo Shandor to collect ghosts, and they had rival teams of Ghostbusters. But it was Ivan Reitman, I think, who brought it down to earth, and that, I think, is what gives it its character. Because I think that the film being set in New York City, it gives it so much. New York is such a part of those first two movies.
Wasn't it originally called? It had a different name, didn't it? It was called like
Ghost Smashers.
Ghost Smashers, yeah.
They didn't even come up with the name, did they? They had to license it from another sitcom.
Yeah, and they only got it at the very last minute, didn't they? So they had to film like the bits where everyone chants Ghostbusters. Like they weren't able to film that when they wanted to, because they weren't confirmed that it was called Ghostbusters.
And the original poster just had the symbol on. Yeah. Because they couldn't put the name on because they hadn't licensed it, which is why that symbol became so iconic. Yeah. Because it started, instead of just being on the building and the car and the suits, it was on all the media from the very beginning, from the teasers, because they didn't have a name for it. What really struck me is how much I enjoyed watching the special effects.
Yeah, they're great.
When I rewatched it. Absolutely incredible. I wondered, like, for me, whether that was the zenith of practical special effects. Because that was, 1984. Then by 1985, you had Young Sherlock Holmes, which had the first ever computer-generated character in it, when that knight jumps out of the window and it's made of glass. That was pure computer animation. That was the first time it had been done. And then from there, like 1989, you had The Abyss. 1991, you had Terminator 2. And then 1993, you had Jurassic Park. And then it was over for practical special effects. But Ghostbusters had that point where I couldn't criticize the effects in that movie. They look real.
One of the things which shows you how good they are is that you can tell that the special effects on Afterlife were based on that, were made to look the same, weren't they? Like they did look great, but obviously they'd not tried to change them. Whereas often on reboots and things like that, remakes, they redo the special effects. It looks terrible. Or it looks too good almost, and it's, I don't know, one of the things that made Afterlife so good was that they kept the effects looking almost identical to the original, which shows you, the new filmmakers were like, no, it's, why fix it if it's not broken? It looks amazing.
And they kept the music as well.
Yeah, it was the same musical cues, wasn't it? But just
I love that music. It was Elmer Bernstein who wrote that, who had been a composer. I think he did the Magnificent Seven. He'd been really ingrained in Hollywood. I was telling you this a while ago, I think, but he was in the McCarthy witch trials. He was basically, he was blacklisted because he'd written some music reviews for a communist magazine, and then he refused to name names, so he got blacklisted, and he ended up doing like really, really cheap B movies. Until John Landis met him through his kids. And then basically got him to do Animal House, and then it started building up. And by then, he did Airplane, and he's got Ghostbusters, Blues Brothers. He kind of got back on top again. But it's just weird that a guy who who was doing that, like the history of it all, going back, like he was proper establishment composer who was doing that music, and it's beautiful.
Yeah,
really,
it's great.
really. The score is absolutely fantastic.
It's got a real character to it, and it's got like you can almost hear the elements of the film. You can hear that it's a bit creepy, but it's also quite quirky and funny.
Yeah. He used one of those. I've got it written down because I can picture it, but I can't pronounce it. You might be able to do a better job than me. It was an Ondes Martineau.
Yeah.
And like the weird sort of that gives the theremin sound.
Yeah.
And that's got that cool, because it can go from comedy to spooky to sci-fi with one instrument, which is I really, really love the way that film sounds. I listened last night as I was making notes, like getting all my notes together for this episode, to the entire score. And it's just so good. It's really like you said, all the cues are there. It sounds classic, but it sounds modern. It's just a really, really well scored movie. But the actual songs that are in it are great as well. You said about Ghostbusters, which actually, so Ray Parker Jr. ripped off the riff for the Ghostbusters theme from I Want a New Drug by Huey Lewis, which they had used when they were doing the initial rushes of the film as background music to the montages.
That happens a lot in film production. That is, the temp. They have a temp track, and then they get someone to recreate it.
Exactly, but no one ever admitted it, and it's not even a passing. Like, he ripped off the riff and the melody.
Yeah.
And basically, they went through about 60 different iterations of it, getting loads of different people to do it, including they asked Huey Lewis to do it.
Right.
But he couldn't because he was doing Back to the Future. And then they settled on Ray Parker Jr.'s one, which was just a rip-off of it. And then Huey Lewis sued them. They paid him $5 million as an out-of-court settlement, which they never spoke about until Huey Lewis started blabbing about it in, I think, 2001. And then Paramount then sued him for talking about it. There's like one of those things like cut up, and then apparently Ray Parker Jr. says like he's never met Huey Lewis, he never went to court. It's just he considers himself to have written that song. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like a massive coincidence. But like other things, like that song that I keep playing whenever we're driving somewhere in the car, is it Mick Smiley, Magic?
Yeah.
I love that.
And has he done any other music at all? I've never heard of it.
He doesn't even have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah,
but that song is incredible. It's so 80s. And the way that it changes in the middle to become a completely different song, that's the song that plays when the ghosts are let out of the containment unit.
Yeah. I mean, I can see in my head when I kind of think of that song and think of the magic thing, I can see in my head that beautiful shot with the top of the building with all of the sort of pinky orange kind of ghostly spume coming out of it, and it's like it's evening, isn't it? And it's just like, it is magic.
That scene as well, also the sound design is incredible.
Yeah,
all the creaking of the buildings and the way it explodes. I read that Ecto 1's siren is actually a leopard's roar, which has been manipulated till it becomes a siren. Like, so the guy who did it was a bit of a maverick. He was called Richard Beggs. He'd done the sound for Apocalypse Now.
Right.
And he did loads and loads of weird stuff, because the idea that things that we just take for granted, like the way that the proton packs sound a bit liquidy, like they're squirting something, that all comes from the sound design.
Yeah.
It's
like
I think it's
cues, isn't it, that just make you think things in a slightly different way.
And this is before digital manipulation as well. So he was doing all that weird stuff basically in a room on his own whilst he was watching the movie, and just like going over it and over again and trying all this stuff. He had no way to repeat the sounds he was getting. So basically he just had to record loads and loads of different banks of each sound he was doing and just give them to the director and say, here you go, this is what you've got to work with. So a lot of what we're discussing is just like really kind of fondly reciting trivia to each other, which I think people can there's so much information out there. I'll put loads of links in the show notes. I've read, since we decided to do this episode, I've read a couple of really, really good books about it, which I'll link to: The Visual History of Ghostbusters, The Oral History of Ghostbusters. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure researching this episode. And there's countless websites. There's Spook Central you can go to. There's Twitter accounts you can follow. I'll link to a few of those in the show notes as well. But I think it's more kind of interesting, really, to explore what Ghostbusters has sort of meant to us and what kind of ideas come from repeated viewing of a film like that for 40 years.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we perhaps need to do is almost certainly what I've done is what we how we kind of view Ghostbusters now through a sort of Vayse filter, in terms of, given the reading and watching and listening we've done in the last 6 months, how do we view Ghostbusters differently?
Yeah, Vaseify
it, you know. And there's a few things that I've noticed about it which I just didn't pick up on, even like for a long time, and then just this recent time I've watched it post Vayse a couple of weeks ago, it's just, oh yeah, that's glaringly obvious now.
Yeah. I've gone down a few rabbit holes.
I bet you
while
have.
I've been researching this. But go on, you show me yours and I'll show you mine.
Okay, so one of the first things I noticed was you've got this cult that are worshipping a mouldy Babylonian god.
Sumerian, not Babylonian.
Ah, okay. Operating in the 1920s. And I guess, to me, kind of that era and the fact that it's the Sumerian god thing links up to Lovecraft. And the fact that you've got kind of Gozer is essentially this like extra dimensional being. The whole idea of like a gatekeeper and a keymaster, the whole idea of there being like a building, and the architecture of the building was, you know, important and somehow created this channel and this, you know, this area in which the ritual could take place. Basically, I got the Necronomicon book, which is the
Simon's
Necronomicon.
Yeah.
And I was looking at that, and there's like a whole load of stuff about Sumerian gods, and then the links. There's almost like a little chart of like
a lexicon.
Yeah, so it's got like the Lovecraft word, then the Crowley word, and then the Sumerian word. And so it's almost as if Lovecraft and Crowley were both getting stuff from Sumerian legends. And it seems that Ghostbusters has gone down a similar route. So like the Necronomicon was 1977, so that was like 7 years prior to Ghostbusters. But then you also had like The Exorcist, which had Pazuzu, which is was from that Mesopotamian region, and Evil Dead also that was 1981. That referenced that had the Necronomicon as a sort of quite different.
The
book.
Necronomicon Ex Mortis, roughly translated Book of the Dead.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just interesting how it had that Lovecraft element to it, and I didn't really think of it as a Lovecrafty film before.
No, it's weird now, because now we're talking about it and thinking about it. The whole idea of the Sumerian god, the cults, the worshippers, the whole thing about creating the temple on the rooftop.
Yeah,
it kind of comes out of left field even in the film.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, that's that kind of. I'll go into this more on my next idea, but it's like it's not very ghosty, is it?
No.
It's not a ghost that's not a...
No, that's something. I mean, for one thing, yeah. So they're essentially godbusters at the end, aren't they?
And I was wondering, sort of, you know, was there a link? Was Harold Ramis into Lovecraft, or was there, you know? But there was actually and there's nowhere that I know of that it's explicitly mentioned that any of the writers were, you know, have said, oh yeah, we're influenced by Lovecraft. But there is, I mean, and not just Lovecraft, but also the you know, other things from that kind of area where Lovecraft meets Crowley in the kind of Kenneth Grant tradition of
where
he was applying Lovecraft stuff to Crowley and magic and vice versa. But there was actually an episode of The Real Ghostbusters called The Collect Call of Cthulhu, in which the New York Library is displaying the Necronomicon for a week, but then it gets stolen by this Cthulhu cult who use it to raise Cthulhu, they live down in the sewers and they like raise Cthulhu in the
nice.
in the bay, and the Ghostbusters have to defeat him. And Egon says that Winston says something like, Cthulhu, I've heard of him before, and Egon's like, he makes Gozer look like little Mary Sunshine. But yeah, you
wouldn't say that to her face, though, would you?
No, but that episode's got loads of references to Miskatonic University and like Lovecraft beings like a Shuggoth and stuff like that, and like all of the characters are named like after they're all named after like either other writers in the Lovecraftian tradition or like Lovecrafty kind of things.
Yeah, now that you sort of mention it, when you see at the very end the top of Dana Barrett's apartment, Spook Central.
Yeah.
There's loads of weird imagery and symbols, particularly on the doors that open to let Gozer through. And it does get a bit, Lovecraftian. It does get a bit ancient dark magic at that point. It's very different, isn't it, when you think about it tonally, the way that the film goes, they go from busting a ghost in a hotel, busting a ghost in a library.
Yeah.
They go around and have those sort of montages to basically standing at the gates of hell, aren't they? Or the gates to another dimension with a god in front of them, and that they're being told. I mean, Gozer the Traveler, Gozer the Destructor. All these sort of almost like grimoire type pantheons, and that sort of thing. It kind of comes into it.
What Zool and Vince Clotho do is basically a sex ritual, isn't it? It's basically a sex magic ritual on the roof. Because
that's interesting. Yeah,
it doesn't show it. It's not explicitly shown, but it's heavily implied that the two have to get together.
Yeah, and that's right up Crowley's street, isn't it?
They disappear behind that kind of rubble or column or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty explicit, isn't it? I mean, when they, she wraps her legs around him and stuff.
I bet it wasn't explicit in the version you got off telly, though.
No. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that, because that's really up Crowley Street and Kenneth Grant's. Yeah, I mean, that's like you say, the sex magic rituals and that sort of thing. That's the Star Sapphire, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a sex magic ritual. And I think I suppose, it's not thoroughly Lovecraftian. I think one of the things that separates it from being sort of a true Lovecraftian film is obviously the humour, but then also you've got the positivity of it, because I think that one of the kind of ultimate messages of Ghostbusters is a lot more about friendship and and sort of human positivity and if you think about even like the end of Ghostbusters 2 when they sing Auld Lang Syne and it breaks through the shell of the slime, and it's like the whole idea of companionship and in Lovecraft the beings are completely like apathetic. They don't have some kind of mission. They just don't give a shit about humanity. We're just nothing to them. We're like the buzzing of flies to them. And that's a very, very bleak when you think about that sort of on a
yeah, I mean, the good guys don't win in Lovecraft, do they?
It's really annoying because I thought of this and thought it's going to be a really good one to bring to Hine for the podcast, and he's going to be like, oh yeah, I never thought of that. And then fucking Greg Newkirk tweeted it yesterday, and I was like, damn you, Greg, why are you so perfect?
He's always one step ahead.
Exactly. So my thought was, they're not really ghosts at all, are they? I mean, aside from perhaps the first ghost in the library, which is pretty ghosty, most of the ghosts that we see in the first film and in certainly in the real Ghostbusters, from what I remember of it, are a lot more like extra dimensional entities, ultra dimensional entities. They don't behave like ghosts. They are brightly colored. They do weird shit. And I mean, Gozer the Gozerian is explicitly an extra dimensional entity. The fact that she or he or it changes, I'm not sure what Gozer the Gozerian's pronouns are, but
it's whatever it wants to be.
Exactly. They change their form depending on what is chosen, which harks back to me to the idea of the feedback loop and the idea of, with within ufology, the beings that people see have some, or within, fairy tales and just everything we discussed in the ultra terrestrial episode, basically the fact that it's related to our culture, it comes through that lens. And that's, again, that's not a ghost thing, is it? That's pure ultra-terrestrial hypothesis.
Yeah, that's John Keel's life, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, the apparently in one draft of the film, Gozer was going to take the form of, I quote, a swirling psychic maelstrom topped by a disembodied aphid's head of monstrous proportions. So, and I noticed that the cave in Ghostbusters Afterlife, so there's a bit where they go into that cave, there's all the dates on the wall of the times when Gozer could possibly come back. And one of the dates was 1945, which was a big year in ufology because that was, the first atomic detonation test at White Sands. And then very shortly after that, the UFO crash at Trinity, New Mexico. Jacques Vallée's written a book about that, So there's just a few of these little kind of things which, and I did notice as well from reading the Necronomicon that the Sumerian word for evil is Zul. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's X-U-L. I would pronounce that Zul. So, yeah.
I suppose in Ghostbusters Afterlife as well, like you were saying, they go into the cave and there's the abandoned mines and the idea that someone was buying up the mines as well.
Yeah.
You've got creatures in mines in the middle of America. It's very pennyroyal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit more than a tenuous link. I think that both the Lovecraft thing and the ultra-terrestrial thing are there somewhere in the DNA of Ghostbusters, and that makes me like it more.
Yeah, because I think that they tried to graft on some backstory about Slimer having lived somewhere, didn't they? Like in the hotel or something.
Yeah.
But it's not really. He's not a very humanoid creature, is he? I mean, he was based on John Belushi, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But he doesn't really look like it. He's some weird blob, really, isn't he, of ectoplasm that sort of floats around.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of the quote unquote ghosts in that you see in the first in the film. I mean, Ghostbusters 2 is not quite the same because you mainly have just one big bad, don't you, really?
Yeah.
That's kind of a bit more traditionally ghosty, really. But then in the first film, a lot of the things that you see are these weird blobs and stuff. And certainly in the real Ghostbusters, you had all sorts of... They just dealt with everything, didn't they? Like, there was one where there was a dinosaur. There was one where there was a UFO buried under the ground. They just anything a bit weird they dealt with. And yeah, I think it's interesting watching it from a age 40 2022 point of view and seeing all this stuff and just thinking, oh yes, I understand this.
It's interesting when you say it that there's no real similarities between the ghosts, is there?
No.
Yeah, the library ghost is completely different to Slimer, which is different than the subway ghost, which is different than the taxi ghost. They're both different to Gozer. They're both different to the Terror Dogs. There's so little similarity running through them. You'd think that if the ghosts were one thing rather than being an ultra-terrestrial manifestation of something, that there would be some similarities. If they were, for example, the spirits of dead people, that they'd be more maybe like the library ghost is before she freaks out.
Yeah. I mean, you wonder though, like how much of that is an aesthetic choice, as in we need to make the film varied and cool. And the
Yeah.
same with the cartoon a lot more, I guess. You know, we need to make it. You can't just have every ghost being like a person because it'll visually not look that exciting for kids.
And they've got to sell toys.
Well, yes, and my parents certainly bought them for me. I had
Brilliant
that one.
Christmas, I think, when
Yeah.
I think a lot of us had it. We were lucky enough to get the Ghostbusters HQ.
Oh, I never had the HQ. I had Granny
did you
Gross. You pressed the
did
back
you?
and like the head spun round. But
You had a gun though, didn't you?
I had the gun. We'll post a picture of that
Yeah.
on the Instagram. I had the gun with the poppers, not the original gun. But one of the things though I thought was there is something which ties all the ghosts together, and that's ectoplasm. I'm dying to hear what you've got to bring to the table tonight.
Well, really, my observation.
Strap in, listeners.
I've gone down a very odd rabbit hole, which isn't very Vayse, as it turns out. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because otherwise we'd just have to end now, because this is basically what I spent the last 2 weeks doing. And it came off an offhanded comment that you made to me ages ago about, I say ages ago, it wasn't when we were kids. It was within the last couple of years, probably around COVID time, about Ghostbusters being basically a representation of the capitalist dream. Yeah, so I started having a look into that. And that actually runs really, really deep.
Yeah,
through the DNA of Ghostbusters in a way that I hadn't seen, but once you have seen, it's very, very obvious. So I want to say, because I'm going to say some bad things about Ghostbusters over the next few minutes, and I want to say that I'm really just playing devil's advocate. You know, this comes from a place of love. You know, this is like Ghostbusters is like my family. You know, and I can say bad things about it. Like if anyone else badmouths Ghostbusters, but I do have a few things I need to get off my chest about Ghostbusters. So. Historical context, it's 1984. You're Reagan era America. You're Thatcherite Britain. Right. So what occurred to me looking through some of these theories and seeing how they described it is that Ghostbusters is actually like a neoliberalist dream, like an absolute sort of neoliberal fairy tale. So I'm not going to give like a political or economical lecture, but like just to explain neoliberalism as I understand it, and I'm not an economist, obviously, or in any way politically informed. But if you'll bear with me whilst I talk about neoliberalism for a minute, because it's going to have relevance to what I'm going to say. So basically, if you imagine capitalism as being the hardware, neoliberalism is the operating system that we're using at the moment. So capitalism can exist independently of neoliberalism. Yeah, and you can have other forms of capitalism like Keynesianism or state capitalism like they have in China, you know, or slightly more socialist versions of capitalism that you have in Scandinavia and that sort of thing. But mainly Western capitalism since the 80s and the period where Ghostbusters was set and made, neoliberal capitalism has really boomed, and it was boom time in America when Ghostbusters was released. So what is neoliberalism is free market capitalism. So basically neoliberalism, the idea of neoliberalism treats everything, including human beings and the way that human beings interact with each other, as being subject to the principles of the free market, right? So it's the economization of all features of life, basically. So they have complete faith in the market, right? It's market fundamentalism. You end up prioritizing like economic indicators over social factors, which is where we are in this country at the moment. You know, we're at, which I hope is somewhere close to the end times of neoliberalism, because at the moment, particularly in this country, it's only economic factors which are being considered at all. You know, there's no regard for social factors or how economic factors could be leading the country astray. So what you have is this never-ending growth. You know, everything has to grow. Everything has to be more. Everyone has to generate wealth. You know, there has to be more and more every year. You know, all you have is this one fucking hammer. You know, and everything is a nail. You know, this is capitalism, kind of writ large. The way that I've analysed neoliberalism to look at Ghostbusters is basically in these basic tenets of neoliberalism, which is one, that markets are uniquely good at organising society. Okay, so that's the foundational idea of neoliberalism, right? Markets are always right, and free markets promote the rhetoric of personal choice. Okay, in a situation where you don't have a market, you should get any institution without that market to behave as if it had a market. You know, we can see that in like the targets of New Labour and so on, the NHS now. You know, it isn't strictly governed by the factors of the free market, but it has to be made as if it is, because that's the only way that they can organise things when you're stuck in that neoliberalist mindset. So then, if that works, then everyone is in competition with everyone else, and the idea is that is a good thing. That gives the best possible outcomes. So you get deregulation, you get privatization, you get the limited role of the government. Okay, so the natural product of that is that those that have wealth are the ones that become in charge. Okay, they have the private enterprise. The private enterprise knows best. We have to listen to them. We have to respond to their needs. We have to give them the freedom to do what they want to do, and we have to try to learn from them and become like them. Okay, and people must think about themselves purely as individuals, not part of some big community for this to work. So when concentrations of wealth are arrived at by market processes, that is the best possible outcome. So all that said, what happens in Ghostbusters? They start out at a university, right, doing experiments. They're using public funding to enhance the general understanding of the world. You know, they're looking into psychology, they're looking into parapsychology, they're analysing data, they're looking for ghosts, really. But then as soon as they find them, the university attacks them, so they leave. The first thing they do is they start business for themselves. I mean, it's what Venkman says, isn't it? You know, for whatever reason, call it fate, call it luck, call it karma. He believes that everything happens for a reason. They have to go into business for themselves. You know, this is the capitalist dream being played out. This is a capitalist fairy tale. You know, this was the American dream of the 1980s. They leave the public sector, they join the private sector, and they save the world. So it's this sort of Reaganite technicolour super dream. And it completely like captures that rise of neoliberal ideology. So how do they fund their ghostbusting enterprise? They get a dodgy mortgage on Ray's house, which is the whole thing that this neoliberal generation of wealth came from, you know, and eventually caused
inherited.
Well, but yeah, it's inherited, but then you get this dodgy loans, you know, and where do they come from? You know, they comes from massive consumer debt, which is what eventually destabilized the economy at the end, you know, in 2008, you know, and you know, obviously they all learnt from that, yeah, as if. But then, so basically, the free market changes these nerdy, outcast, sort of scatterbrained scientists into national and eventually international heroes. Mm-hmm. You know, they become the poster boys for free market, for enterprise, for startups. You know, yeah. Ghostbusters is a startup. They throw off the shackles of the public institutions to actualize themselves. Yeah, so it's like they're like completely in its spirit. So like whereas comedies before this had been more anti-authority, you know, things like Animal House or Caddyshack, that's this sort of National Lampoon going against the man. Ghostbusters is very much the man, you know.
Yeah.
They are, and who are the bad guys?
The Environmental Agency.
The Environmental Protection Agency, right?
Although that guy is an absolute cunt.
No, yeah,
Walter Peck.
Walter Peck is an unmitigated prick, but bureaucrats do tend to be, you know, it's a function of their job, isn't it? You know, you can't have the nice guys doing that sort of stuff, right? Government regulation is from the very beginning, you know, from the second Walter Peck walks in, Venkman, symbolizing free market capitalism, the neoliberalist dream, starts bashing him, you know, for everything that he stands for, you know. And when Walter Peck walks in, even though he's a prick, his request is fairly...
It's fairly reasonable, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
he goes in and he says, you know, we want to know what you're doing here. I want to see the containment unit. I've heard reports of unlicensed nuclear equipment and dangerous byproducts. All of that is completely true. They admit themselves that their proton packs, they're unlicensed nuclear accelerators.
The nuclear weapons, they're carrying nuclear weapons. I think like
exactly.
They must have really struggled. They're like, we need to make Walter Peck like the worst person possible.
Get
this
and so they're basically saying fuck the environment, because what we're doing is making a lot of money here, and we should be allowed to do that. You know, this is America. This is 1984. You know, this is just before the landslide of Reagan's second term. You know, so they're making and I mean, like, as we've said, Walter Peck is right, and he turns out to be right as well. You know, that there is a catastrophe. It is caused by this sort of crazy system of dealing with a waste product in an illegal way, which causes it. You know, and basically through this, Venkman's talking about you know, like indispensable defense science and of the next generation. You know, franchise rights. They move into a fire station, which is an ex-state-owned building, which they make into their sort of corporate headquarters. They get straight into television advertising. This isn't done from the goodness of their hearts. They're not priests going around, you know, or shaman, you know, who are moving spirits onto a better place. No, you know, this they're making money. They're charging a lot of money for this, you know, and you know, it's a fucking business. This is yuppie era. You know, they're cashing in on that. They're becoming part of that. And Winston buys into this. You know, he shows up halfway through sniffing for the money.
There's a steady paycheck in that. I believe anything.
He's only in it for the money.
Yeah.
You know, he'll believe in anything if the money is correct.
That big list of things that Janine gives him, and that's all he's interested in.
And that's the weird thing. It's just a side point, but like, is Winston really the only applicant for that job? Because that's what's kind of implied, isn't it? He just turns up, they take one look at him and say, beautiful, you're hired.
Yeah.
You know, and you'd think that people would be queuing around the block to be a hero who's making lots of money. And that's where this thing's a bit weird, because do the Ghostbusters have a monopoly? The only thing that I can think is that Spengler has patents on all of the equipment.
Yeah, he's a pretty thorough guy.
Yeah. I think that therefore, I mean, you can't tell me that he's not, you know, patenting and trademarking the Ghostbusters symbol. You know, he's not patenting the proton pack, even the mood slime in the second. All of this stuff is like incredible science, you know, and incredible research. You know, he's definitely making millions and millions off this.
Yeah.
You know, through trademarks, through patents, through selling. I mean, all of this has military applications.
And yet his child never saw any of it, did she?
No. So what they're doing really is that they are ensuring that no one else can move into their sector. You know, they are the Amazon, they are the Facebook, they are the Google of 1984. You know, they no one else can compete because they don't have the technology to do it. No one else can even get a foothold. Following this through about this 1980s Republican, very conservative thinking, it's like, what actually are the ghosts. So we've talked about what you said about them being ultra-terrestrials and so on. That's within the world.
Yeah.
But what do they symbolize? Like, what part of the American psyche are we tapping into here? Because if you look at the ghosts, are they actually doing any harm? You know, like, so the librarian gets scared, but she's fine. We see her later and she's fine. She's just scared. When they meet the library ghost, she's reading books and she asks them to be quiet. And Ray attacks her and she attacks him back and never hurts them. They run out of that building completely unharmed.
Yeah.
Slimer has been in the Sedgwick Hotel a lot longer than any other person who was in there at that moment. You know, he's been there from the beginning. All he's doing is eating scraps of food off the trays.
Yeah. Again,
he doesn't hurt anyone until basically Venkman confronts him with a positron glider.
Yeah.
At which point he attacks him with a very
becomes aggressive.
Yeah, and it's a very like non-lethal way of attacking someone. You know? He slimes him. He's fine afterwards. He feels a bit funky by his own admission, and that's it. You know, none of these ghosts are doing anything really, and until so they're harmless. They're not scary to the majority of people. You know, so what actually are they? You know, because I think that what they're getting at here is that the ghosts are a representation of the other. You know. Whoever the other might be.
Yeah, whoever's getting blamed for...
Yeah, they're in your hotels, they're in your libraries, they're on your subways, they're driving your taxis, they're eating your food, they're molesting your women, which is what happens,
it's people from different races or people, whoever the scapegoat of the current right-wing government is going to be. You know, it's Meghan Markle and Prince Harry.
Like, I mean, I don't want to hammer on that particular point too aggressively because I don't think that it's mean-spirited in the film itself. I don't think that they are a representation of any one community or race or religion. But I mean, the cover of the Atlantic magazine in the montage says, "The politics of the next dimension. Do ghosts have civil rights?" Right, that's in the montage. So that's actually acknowledged in universe. You know, that there is something going on there. You know, the disconnect is actually felt so much that it's on the front of Atlantic magazine. And also to remember that what you have in the background at that time as well is the AIDS epidemic, particularly in New York City in the early 80s as well. So all that's going on. Patient Zero was in the bathhouses of New York in 81, 82, 83, you know, all that sort of thing. But I don't think we need to be specific because I don't think that it is a specific metaphor. I think it's a general metaphor, you know.
Do you think it's an intentional metaphor then? Do you think?
I think it's a subconscious metaphor. I don't think that they wrote it intending it, but I think in the same way that I don't think they intended it to be this sort of fantastical neoliberal parable about the greatness of the free market. I don't think that was intended, but I think it was a product of rich people writing something in the 1980s. You know, people who are really on the up, writing something. I think it symbolizes the hopes and fears of the time.
So you think it was, so one of them almost like subconsciously what a lot of people were thinking.
Even like the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
The egregore of capitalism is embodied in that movie. The egregore of the other is the evil. And so what does that make, really? Xul, Vince Clortho, Gozer, they're revolutionaries.
Yeah.
You know, they're not evil. They're an expression of pushing back against some sort of repression.
And Xul Gozer has been around a lot longer than the fucking Ghostbusters and New York City.
So is this a Gaia parable? I mean, I don't want to stretch the metaphor too thin, but we can consider all this stuff.
Why not?
The thing is that when they do catch these spirits, these ghosts, these others, when they do catch them, what do they do with them?
Put them in jail.
They incarcerate them, right?
Yeah.
This, like I was saying earlier, this isn't a challenge in the way that the Catholic Church does in The Exorcist, you know, of something that's sort of come into our world making a terrible mess of itself and they're cleaning it up. And this isn't a shamanistic way of bringing peace to these spirits that may be caught, right? They actually say that they capture them and keep them. They have the potential to capture them and keep them there indefinitely.
Yeah.
And the original script, this is how they describe the containment unit, because in the original script there was a window in the containment unit so you could look inside.
Yeah.
This is what the original script said. It's a bleak repository for lost souls of many species. Strange lights, mists, spectral shapes waft about aimlessly. It's a sad and frightening limbo and a most unholy makeshift asylum.
Oh, it's horrible.
It chills you to the bone in that context. Now, I've just read the biography of Damien Eccles. That sounds like death row to me.
Jesus Christ, man! I don't know if I can watch Ghostbusters again. I think we might have to can this episode and just never speak of it again.
It might be too potent for people. It might get the next Ghostbusters sequel cancelled.
Dropping truth bombs left, right, and centre.
But then the producer, Michael C. Gross, the executive producer, said that they had to cut that scene because they didn't want people to feel sorry.
Yeah.
For the ghosts, in the same way that they won't let people do proper visitations when you're on death row or something. They're monitored by other people. So what did they plan to do with these ghosts? I mean, you hold them indefinitely. Okay, so that's one thing that they talk about at the beginning. They're building a prison, not a kind, friendly place for them. But the next terrifying thing about that is that, as with how Damien Eccles ended up on death row, right? This could happen to any of us. We're all going to die.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that you can be sure of in life, is that you're going to die. So who's to say that any of us aren't going to end up in that basement at the Hook and Ladder in downtown New York?
I don't like this at all. It's horrible. I mean, you think about the overcrowding as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, the overcrowding. What was their crime? Reading in a library, eating hot dogs at a hot dog stand.
Absolutely disgusting. Like, I mean,
but to take this
with Slimer, it's body shaming as well, isn't it? Basically, he's a bigger gentleman, and they just, but the film pictures him as being like gluttonous and
slimy.
He might have like glandular issues or physical problem that means he's not able to exercise as much as other people, or a psychological problem whereby he eats too much and like a food addiction kind of thing. And really, the way that they treat it is
terrible. It's sad, really.
It's sad. It's just downright disgusting.
But what do the Ghostbusters do when they're called up on their behaviour? Being the good Republican conservatives that they are, they go straight for the Old Testament Bible. Okay, so first of all, things are that they're busy, they're overworked. They reference the Old Testament from about 3/4 of the way through. It's not mentioned early on. They start to bring it in. So there's when Winston says, like, "Do you believe in God?" Ray's obviously agnostic. He never met him. But I remember Revelations 7:12, and I looked as he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became as black as sackcloth, and the moon became as blood. Judgment Day.
Judgment Day.
This is manifest destiny. They're using the Bible to say that it's their right to bust ghosts.
Yeah.
They do it again, when they're challenged by the EPA, who have been proven right at that point, go to the mayor's office, and what do they start doing? They get a priest right in there, and they start talking about real wrath of God type stuff. This is the fear. This is what happens in conservative America.
Yeah.
If things are going wrong, you pull out your Bible.
And they also get the military guy as well, don't they? Who says that
they get the military. They get a military escort away from the mayor. It's real wrath of God type stuff. So all that said, what they are failing to acknowledge, what they're failing to see here, I believe, is that they are unwitting participants in Goza's plan from the very beginning.
Okay.
Because what they do is they essentially gather, trap, and focus this ectoplasmic energy into a specific spot where it can be used to then summon Goza. When the police come, when Walter Peck comes and he's got the the whatever it is, the police with him, and he can he's got the warrant to come into the basement. They say, but
shut it down. He's like,
shut it all down. Yeah,
shut it all down.
So what they say is that this was all working fine until when they're in the mayor's office. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. There's a very, very memorable scene where Ray comes in and says, "How's the grid holding up?" Not good. Tell him about the Twinkie.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've talked about how the whole thing is going to blow before Walter Peck's even got involved in it. So what they're doing is actually dangerous and like unstable. Okay, if they hadn't collected and focused all that energy, would Gozer have been able to come through the dimensional portal at all? They're invoking Old Testament stuff. They're exploding buildings, which is allowing spirits to pass through the dimension. So they're talking about Judgment Day. They're talking about the apocalyptic, the revelations.
Yeah.
So who are they in this? They are the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah, holy shit.
Look at it like Hellier. They are part of the ritual. Okay. Everything they do takes them step by step closer to the moment where they get onto that building. And of course it's the four of them who end up on top of that building, facing Gozer as she steps out.
Because
they even get to form...
Along.
Yeah, it was the only way it could have happened.
Because without the Ghostbusters creating that concentration of energy and spirits, it wouldn't have blown and allowed her to come through.
Exactly. They've messed with the natural order of things, which was when ghosts were just wafting around. No one really believed in them. There's legendary one at Sedgwick Hotel. There was something in the library. The act of busting them brought more ghosts.
So in terms of coming back out of the, like you've kind of gone into the story there. So coming back out of it, what does that represent in terms of your metaphorical theory?
You see, this is going on to a separate sort of parallel shift, you see, because on the one side you've got what's being presented, which is the American dream.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is the rotten underbelly, of what we're doing. Okay, so when they go there, they even get to choose the form of the destructor.
Yeah,
that's very, very goetic. You're allowed to choose the form, but they choose the form. They choose the thing that comes to destroy the world,
and it is sugar.
It's a corporate mascot.
A corporate mascot, and it's also like greed, isn't it? Like sugar and all like the shit.
Gluttony, sugar. They've basically gone against the rules of nature, and that the whole world is having to pay for what they're going to do. And I mean, look at it. So it's this goetic idea. The god comes and she's absolutely terrifying. They are terrified. They use their weapons. Their weapons are useless. I mean, they were Gozer's weapons all along. They were tools of Gozer, basically. Then as with certain goetic spirits, she gives them a choice of what it wants to appear as. Because certain goetic spirits, when you summon them, they'll give you a choice. Or you can ask them that next time you appear, could you appear as something a little less terrifying? So that I can do this stuff. So so Ray chooses something from his childhood, when he used to roast marshmallows as a kid and so on. But when you look at it, how is the Marshmallow Man actually going to bring destruction to the world? It destroys a part of New York City around Central Park. Yeah. But what's then going to happen? I mean, are we really having to believe here that the Marshmallow Man is going to run around the world?
How's he going to cross the sea?
Yeah, I mean, is he going to swim? Will it dissolve in the water? I mean, what is going on here? It's very, very, very weird. So they pick basically the form of what is going to destroy the world. The four horsemen of the apocalypse summoned to the top of the building by demons. They're brought there by, again, it's quite goetic. They're brought there by middlemen. Vince Clorthos and Zool. They're brought to the temple, which is the top of the building. What do they do at the top of the building? I mean, how do they bust Gozer?
They cross the streams.
They cross the streams, which is deadly.
Yeah.
So they are summoned to the top of the building, and when they get there, they indulge in human sacrifice.
Because it could, yeah.
It kills them.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. So at the end, that they're in a better place, aren't they? Goza's gone. They're covered in all this like white floaty material. Like it's all around them. But Ghostbusters is, and this is one of the things that you talked about earlier, essentially a film about multiple dimensions. They even say when they go to the top, shift to the nearest convenient parallel dimension.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is where they are then, because what happens in actual, what would happen in actual sort of mainstream continuity is that they go and they complete the ritual. They sacrifice themselves, a blood sacrifice to the great god Gozer.
Yeah.
Who then inherits the world and creates a socialist utopia.
I feel like my mind has been blown. There was a few things in there that I had considered before, but you took it to a whole other level.
So I think that now we need to watch Ghostbusters again with all this in mind.
I'm scared to. I don't know. I drew whilst you were talking, I drew a little picture of Gozer. I don't know if you can see there.
Oh yeah, I can. Let's put it on the Instagram.
I will. I'll put it on the gram.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll put it on the gram. I also took a little photograph of you when you were in full. Like you look like that picture of Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where he's got all of the like red strings behind him, and he's like going like that. It looked like that. It looked like a man in full frenzy. It was good. Yeah, that was. I think we've covered some good ground there, and hopefully there'll be some stuff that's new to people, to our listeners.
Yeah, well, I tried to make an effort to try to talk about something, because like we were saying, the trivia, there's endless Ghostbusters trivia. There's all these amazing books. You can get them. There's one that I really wish I had that came out when we were about 17 or 18, which had the whole script and drawings from the original script. And I've kind of cobbled it together with that. I know one of our good friends, again, I won't name them, had 2 copies of it. It was a really, really good book. And through the years, there's a new one coming out called Nearest Convenient Parallel Dimension, I think, which is a deeper dive into, like how they made it and the production of it. I think it looks really good. I'll link to as many as I can in the show notes, because like I was saying before, I've had probably the most fun out of any of the episodes that we've researching this episode. But what I was going to ask you now is sort of how did Ghostbusters inform Vayse, which we've kind of covered, but I think it's worth talking about again. And how can Ghostbusters help you to leave a better life? Because I think it definitely can, if we ignore what I've just spent about 20 minutes talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is, like, one of the kind of part of the core, or one of the kind of early things in our friendship, and certainly one of the main stages of our friendship, was the band that we were in when we were like 15, 16. We used to do covers of the Ghostbusters theme and stuff like that, and I think we took a lot from that, in terms of, I think we felt like various characters represented us. And I know that you had a strong affinity with Ray, and I remember our guitarist taking me aside in a rare moment of almost personal sincerity and saying, "Buckley, I say that I mean this in the kindest way, but you're the most Venkman person I've ever met." And
which has bad connotations now, but we didn't know that at the time.
But please, I do not. Yeah, I think it was actually meant to be a compliment. But yeah, and I think it's had that whole thing about like teams, groups, the importance.
Yeah, I mean, it's a model
people.
for how friendship can work, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, and it works in bands, but it also works in terms of just that whole like different characters within a friend group, or in terms of even like the workplace, if you want to be really fucking boring.
Yeah, well, the whole idea of those guys who'd come up through, Second City and Saturday Night Live and all that sort of thing. The idea was always to make the other people always make the other person look better, than you. Always give them the best line and so on. Because if everyone's trying to make everyone else look better, everyone starts to look better.
Yeah.
I mean, it did. I think that truly, if we can get rid of all of the capitalism and the Lovecraftian stuff and everything, the core of that movie is friendship, isn't it? The friendship of those three guys, and then Winston as well when he comes, and then the way they all come together, and they it's friendship that saves the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's them being willing to put others before themselves at the end, which is a nice antidote to the capitalist thing, because at the end they decide that they're going to do whatever it takes to save the world, even if it jeopardizes their life. And I think it's something that I've assimilated through the years. I like to think into myself, a lot of Ghostbusters, even the way that I call my friends by their surnames, I think is down to Ghostbusters, because like Buckley, Holmes, Bilbo, Hodge. I even call my partner by her second name. It's like, I think the fact is that if you're not my blood relative and I don't call you by your surname, I probably just don't like you very much.
Yeah, it's a sign of respect, isn't it?
Yeah. Ghostbusters is about coming together in the face of danger, and every human being is capable of acts of great bravery. I think it's time we start to wrap up. So I think I want to thank everyone again who's listening. Again, we've only been launched for, it's less than 2 months at the moment, and we've been really overwhelmed by people's interest and people who are enjoying this. It's really, really, really good. Really like enjoying the community of the sort of core people who we can chat about. I'm getting book recommendations. So shout out to Giants of Discovery.
Kev.
And I've actually been and looked into some of the books that he's been recommending to me. A lot of people have been interested in the music, so you can get that from Bandcamp. There's a link through from our website. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at VAYSEESYAV. So that's Vayse, then Vayse spelled backwards. You can email us, vayseinfo@gmail.com. That's VAYSEINFO@gmail.com. And people have been emailing us, and it's always great to hear from people, and we reply whenever we can.
It's been cool because there's quite a few sort of old friends have come out of the woodwork, people I've not spoken to in years who've picked up on it and been really into it, or people who we kind of didn't know who were into this stuff, who've contacted us. It's really cool. It's really good. I think people, I think my brother said he just finds it relaxing listening to our voices because he's
bastard, he's been indoctrinated.
I know, he's grown up just with us, just being in the next room and hearing us. Can you imagine when he's 5 years younger than us? So when we were kind of, he was pretty young when we were, imagining when we were like 10, 11 up in my room, he'd have been sort of 6, and he'd have been there in his room just hearing us
He took the full force of our bullshit.
Yeah.
And if you enjoy the full force of our bullshit, please rate us and leave a comment, especially on Apple, because that's where people look at these sort of things. You can leave us a star rating, which is great, and we'd really love it if you could leave us a comment, even if it's good, even if it's short, as long as it's positive. If it's not positive, just go and start your own podcast. I'm not interested.
Do you know, I have a question for you, Hine, before we go. So, if you could pick 2 Ghostbusters, 2 of the original 4 Ghostbusters, to do a podcast together, like Vayse, but them 2, who would you choose? And think carefully about it. I
don't even have to think. I know this. It would be Egon and Winston, because those guys have depths. We've seen Ray in full flow and Venkman in full flow, but to have Egon and Winston having a chat about stuff, the meeting of minds that would be there, it would be absolute genius. There'd be no, there'd be none of the fronting that Venkman and Stans do. It would be just, you can imagine, the insightful questions that Winston would ask for Egon to answer. I think it's a match made in heaven. That.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about also you don't really see that much interaction between Egon and Winston in the film. Like Winston tends to hang out with Ray a bit more, doesn't he?
The two hands-on guys.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that Spengler has any friends really, but he has that weird thing about Janine, doesn't he? There's that moment when he sort of slinks out from underneath her desk, isn't there?
And there's a couple of like sexy Egon moments. There's that, and then there's when he says, "I think they're more interested in my epididymis," which isn't that
in the
like,
second movie.
Isn't that like in your balls? It's like this.
That is part of your balls.
Part of your balls. And then,
it's a very specific part of your balls as well.
Yeah, and then it's like so.